You ready? All right. Well, thank you everybody for coming out today. Thank you for those of you who are tuning in somewhere else. In celebration of Groundhog's Day today, we're going to do a program about all the different rodents that we have in our local area. Wait a minute. What is that I see up there? Who are you?
I'm Landis Lou.
What are you doing out of hibernation?
Well, I don't know. It's cold up here, but I was kind of hungry.
Well, I have some of my lunch left. It's just a salad or lettuce. Would you like to come up and get some?
Yes, I'll get some. Oh, that looks delicious. I am an herbivore, you know.
I do know that you are a herbivore.
I also came out because I wanted to know if it was springtime yet.
And do you think it feels like spring outside today?
Well, it didn't feel like springtime today, but I didn't see my shadow, so I am excited for an early spring.
He did not see his shadow, which means he thinks there's going to be an early spring.
So, because you see, my fur isn't warm and toasty like a beaver. I don't like all this cold weather. The spring is my favorite time of year.
Well, Lou, I think you should maybe head back down under the ground for a little longer, because no matter what your shadow tells us about spring doesn't come until March 21st anyhow, you know. And no, it felt a little like spring yesterday, but Lou, Friday's gonna be below freezing.
Brr.
You might want to go back down under that hole.
That's a good idea.
Hey, Lou, before you go away, though, who you rooting for in the Super Bowl?
Well, you know, I don't watch much football because I sleep most of the season, but I do love the Eagles. I like the football team, that is. I don't like real Eagles because they try to eat me. But that Jalen Hurts, I like him, so I'm definitely cheering on the Eagles.
Well, Lou, head back down under that hole for a few more months, because there's nothing growing in my garden yet for you to eat, so...
Sounds good. Bye, everyone.
Bye. So I feel like all the groundhogs this morning were looking like this. All you humans just go away. Don't try and wrestle me out of my underground den. Of course, this is the most famous groundhog in Pennsylvania, Puxatawney Phil. Although we have our favorites here in Lancaster County, like I just learned about Lou, your groundhog here, Octorara Orphe down in the southern end of the county. There's that new famous groundhog Poppy who lives at a rehabilitation center in Millersville, and I could go on and on. And I think I heard somebody rattling off who saw their shadow and who didn't. I think I saw this morning on the news, Puxatawney saw his shadow, which means 6 more weeks of winter. Yes. Now, in the groundhog world, of course, they are supposed to be hibernating. They're supposed to be deep down under their den. Now, if only this was today with that white stuff on the ground. That's snow, you know. The male groundhogs are not true hibernators. When it's warm, they come out. I saw one 3 weeks ago roaming around along the side of the road in the county park. And I told that groundhog the same thing I told Lou. Go back under the ground because there's nothing growing in my garden right now. Although, because we've had this warm spell recently, there are lots of things pushing up, lots of leafy greens that they can eat. So the female is the very first one, the male is the very first one who comes out. She stays underground until it gets warm enough. And when the males come out first, they start to fight. They start to claim their territory because they know that as soon as the females come out from underground, it's mating season. And then those females will go back down under the ground until, aw, go ahead, y'all can say aw. Yeah, unless they live next to your garden. And it's typically by June and July that those babies are out of the den, they're being active, and they're looking for some good food. And by the end of July and into August, that's when mom tells them to go find their own place to live. In the groundhog world, it happens quite quickly. Well, first of all, she's only pregnant for about 30 days. And then about 60 days later, she's ready to send them on their own. You know, it's kind of like being a bird. 16 days after you hatch, mom's ready for you to leave the nest. But it's typically at that time of the year when those of us who have gardens see more groundhogs, because all the little ones want to come and explore and find all that good, wonderful food that they need. Well, one reason the groundhog will find a hole and hibernate in it, whether it's out in an open field or under a garage or a shed or someone's house, because being down under the ground is going to keep them nice and warm. Okay? You might have heard Anita say that the groundhog's not like the beaver. They don't have this nice thick fur like the beaver has. And so in the winter, there's no food, you don't have thick fur, well, you might as well go down under the ground and hibernate. And down under in their den where they're hibernating, they're of course using that den year round. But during hibernation season, in some of the chambers where they live, there might even be snakes hibernating. Remember, groundhogs don't eat snakes, they only eat vegetables, so the snakes have a great place to hibernate with them. And the groundhogs will have several entrance holes. This one only shows 2, sometimes they will have more than 2. They have separate chambers for sleeping, and this is the adult sleeping area, because groundhogs are smart enough to put the children over here in a whole different room. And then they're even smart enough to have the bathroom all the way over here, close to one of those exit holes for ventilation and air circulation kinds of things. So living down under the ground, they've got it all figured out, and their house is not going to fall down. Well, it might get flooded, but oftentimes that won't last too long in a groundhog burrow. Oh, here was one in the garden. They love those tomatoes. They love anything they can find in that garden. Doesn't even have to be vegetables. They'll eat our flowers also. And as we learn today about the different groundhogs, we're going to look at what makes a rodent, and that's their teeth. They have these continuously growing front teeth to do all of that wonderful eating and grinding of all those vegetables, having nice flat back teeth for chomping through all of their plants. You can even see his 2 front teeth right there. So as we move to some of the other rodents, some that are, some would say, the intern would say, cute and cuddly. Not all of us might think that they are cute and cuddly. This one's kind of cute. And this one is a hibernator. This is actually a jumping mouse. Now, as we know, not all mice hibernate, okay? They can be active, whether they live outside or they live in our house. And I'm going to go through a few of the different species of mice. But I start with the jumping mouse because, like the groundhog, it actually hibernates. It fattens itself up in the fall of the year, just like the groundhog does. They are named for their wonderful ability to jump and bounce. They have amazingly long back legs, and they are the mouse with the longest tail. The longest tail there, okay? They are also hoarders. Oh, I thought I had another picture of them. They're hoarders. They hoard their food. They store it where they're hibernating. So like the groundhog might wake up and need a snack and leave the underground den, the jumping mouse doesn't have to leave its home. It has snacks right next to it. Kind of like in my car. There's always a snack on the front seat, just in case, you know? So, acting a little like the jumping mouse and the other animals. Now, this is actually an animal who does not live in Lancaster County. We have to go down south to see the capybara. It is the world's largest rodent. So if a groundhog can be anywhere from 7 to 15 pounds, and that's high, a capybara can weigh anywhere from 70 to 150 pounds. Yeah, you know, not an herbivore, and it's an herbivore, you know. They're just an eating machine. And there's their teeth to prove that they are an eating machine. Not only do they weigh 150 pounds, but they're going to stand about 4 or 5 feet tall. Okay? Aren't you glad they're not roaming Lancaster County? Yeah. So the capybara, don't worry, we don't have to worry about them around here. Here's a look at all the different rodent skulls. And those of you who are in here will have a chance to come up at the end. I have all those skulls right here on the table that you can take a closer look at to see just how those continuously growing front teeth are, the lower jaw movement. And we'll talk a little bit more about those as we get to each one. Like the largest skull you see on the table from our largest rodent, the beaver. I mean, if you get rid of this part, he does look a lot like a groundhog, okay? Now, the beaver has more orange-colored teeth than the groundhog because the beaver doesn't do a good job brushing its teeth when it's alive. No, it's from the iron in their diet. They're getting a little more iron in their diet because clearly the groundhog doesn't like to eat the spinach in my garden to get the iron. So just from the food, that's why you'll see the color different. But most of the other rodents have the orange on their teeth. The beaver with that wonderful, amazing tail, those wonderful teeth for chopping down those trees. They do a better job than my chainsaw does. They actually do a better job of knowing which direction the tree's gonna fall also than the human and the chainsaw does. So I have a couple of the logs up here that were chewed on by the beavers. Not only is the beaver chewing down that log to build its home, dragging the log to its dam that it's building, it's eating all that wood. It had eaten all the bark off of that tree. Okay? Bark, vegetables, it's all a part of what makes them an herbivore. So they chewed off the bark, ate the bark. They'll then eat some of the chewings that are left behind. The different sized logs that they take to their dam, some of them are to build the dam. But don't worry, the beaver also has a food stash in its dam. So if we have the dam, now some people don't want to have a beaver close to their house because when they dam up the creeks, that could cause flooding. But it also causes wetlands and more pond areas. So in some places, having those beavers in that particular habitat help the entire habitat, okay? Don't worry, I do understand if your house is downstream or upstream, not necessarily a good idea to have that beaver dam close by. But inside that beaver dam, they're not totally underwater all the time. Although, a beaver can hold its breath for 15 minutes and be down under the water for 15 minutes, but half of that dam is above the water. So when they're inside just hanging out, they're dry. They're also smart enough to have the babies in a nesting chamber and then an eating chamber. That's where they are storing smaller sticks, the smaller sticks that they're going to eat, the ones that are more green, the ones that they freshly cut down. Because a beaver can have its dam and live in there. From what I've read, they say typically they last 3 to 4 years, the dam, because other than erosion, floods, decay, the beaver will have to move every 3 to 4 years. So the young tree branches are what the beaver will be snacking on. And when we find their droppings, we know what they were eating. Yes, this is beaver scat or poop or their droppings. You can even, as you look at it, they're little round balls, very distinct. And look at all the wood chips in it, okay? You know, whenever we learn or whenever I teach about scat and animals' droppings, you know, the fox eats the mouse, so you get the hair and the bones. The beaver eats the bark from the tree, so what do you see in it? You see the bark from the tree. Kind of like the horse manure on the road. They're eating grass. What's in that horse manure? A whole lot of grass. So typically when you're somewhere where there are beavers, before you actually see their droppings, you're gonna see lots of stumps of trees that have been chewed on. And that's typically the best way to track and to know that a beaver is in a given area. Now that fur of the beaver, when you come up here at the end, because I know you're gonna wanna feel that scratchy groundhog fur and the super soft, thick beaver fur. Well, the beaver also has an advantage that the beaver fur is water repellent. So when the beaver comes out of the water beads right off of its back. The groundhog, even in the summertime when it's raining, where does the groundhog go? Underground. They don't want to get wet, okay? They don't have the natural oil like the beaver has. They don't have that thick fur to help keep them dry. And I clicked over to the cousin of the beaver, who also has a water-repellent fur coat, but notice the thinner tail. Some of you might think it's a rat, but it's not. It's a musky scented rat. It is the musk rat, okay? That beaver uses that tail to defend itself by slapping it on the water and announcing its presence. The muskrat doesn't have that ability because the tail is much skinnier. Their tail is more designed as a rudder. So as the muskrat is swimming, it uses its tail as a rudder because it's a little flat as opposed to being round like the rat. And now we'll go back to, there it is, snacking on some vegetables from the water, plants. And here's a small muskrat den. Now this part is up out of the water, okay? So the muskrat enters its den like the beaver from below and has a nice dry spot. Although they're not quite the architect like the beaver. They don't have multiple rooms inside their home. They have one, the nest chamber, And that is actually under the ground over here, way away from the water, okay? They refer to this more as the push-up area, and that's a place where they're gonna store their food. So they have access to two places, but you have to go through the water to get to those if you are a muskrat. Let me show you another size comparison. If the fur didn't do it for you, here's the skull comparison. Beaver, muskrat, much smaller. Now you also have to remember when people look at the skulls, they often think some of them, well, that looks really small. We have to remember they had the muscle and all that fur around their skull, which makes them look a little larger, okay? Both of them will get that extra wonderful fur to help keep them warm in the winter time. And like the groundhog, they have a very similar reproductive cycle. The beavers and the muskrats are gonna mate once it gets warm, come April. And just like those groundhogs, the babies will start to be active 2 months later and heading out on their own. Beaver babies?
Mixed with muskrats.
Or muskrat babies?
Oh, I thought you said the two of them mixed.
No, they don't mix. Nope, they don't mix. And you know what? There's probably a name for beaver babies, but I'm not sure what that is. Are they kits? Yeah, I'm not sure either. But you know, I'm going to go look it up later just to see what a baby beaver is called. I know what a baby groundhog is called. A pain in my... Oh, no, I didn't mean that. We don't want... I'm not sure what a baby groundhog is called, other than I don't want extra groundhogs anywhere near my garden. But I'm sure they have a name too. I'll have to look that one up. So here's our muskrat friend, and there he is swimming with his wonderful coat that's keeping him extra warm and chewing on some leafy greens in the water. Beavers and muskrats, remember I said they can stay underground or underwater for about 15 minutes. It's because they have the ability to kind of keep breathing while they're trapping out the water. They eat partially submerged in the water also, okay? So sometimes they're laying on their backs eating, and half of their body and face are submerged in that water. Now this next one is a mink who hangs out with the muskrats and the beavers along the stream bank, but the mink is not a rodent. Take a look at the mink's skull. They don't have those continuously growing front teeth. The mink is a predator. They have sharp teeth. They have long canines, pointy teeth, not smooth for grinding vegetables and fruit. So the mink is along the water to catch the fish and the crayfish, okay? They look kind of like a little ferret. Here's the mink. I brought the mink pelt and threw the mink in just because their fur is exactly like the beaver and the muskrat, okay? You know, you remember wearing the mink to keep you nice and warm, just like, you know, I'm not saying people should or shouldn't wear beaver coats, but I can understand why they did. You know, I always say when I have the pelts out, if I had to pick which animal's fur I wanted to have, I would pick the beaver, just because of all those great qualities that it has. So I get it, why people used to wear them. Luckily now, since people aren't wearing beaver and muskrat and mink anymore, that has helped all of those animals' populations go up, okay? And now back to another rodent. One of our smaller rodents called a vole. That's V-O-L-E, okay? The vole the tiny little eating machine, okay? Eating 3 to 5 times its weight every day. And all winter long, they are active. So all the rest of our rodents are not hibernating, so they have to find food all winter long. There's what you're looking at right here of that small little vole skull. They're the ones who hide down in the grass.
Baby groundhogs are called kids, pups, or chucklings.
What was the last one?
Chucklings.
Chucklings. Thank you, Google.
You know, they chuck wood.
Yeah. How much wood would a woodchuck chuck if a woodchuck would? Yep. Thank you. So the vole is the one who's going to hide right in the grass. They're going to make a little hole right beneath the blades of grass. And they're going to use that as their runways. They're the ones, if you walk outside into the lawn, you are going to see tunnels. Little runways. That's their paths. That's, from walking, they wore away the grass. They also ate some of that grass, too, while they were walking on it. So they have their little hole, and then they have all their little trails there. Now, a vole, V-O-L-E, is very different from a mole, M-O-L-E. A vole is a rodent. It eats vegetables. A mole eats meat. See what I did? V for vegetable, M for meat. Okay? It's a good way to help. Remember who eats what and who you want in your garden. Because I'll take moles in my garden, but not the vole. So here's some more vole trails. I'll come back to the mole then. Even if we get a little bit of that snow, please, someday this winter, we have 6 more weeks, so hopefully we'll get a little. You can see those vole trails on the snow even. Again, because they're looking for food. They're leaving their little hole. They're out looking for food, running back in. You can see their footprints and their trails very easily. And those are the babies. Now, they can breed more than once a year. Now, not as much as mice, okay? But they will breed multiple times from spring through fall of the year, okay? And all they need is to gather a little bit of grass and put it in that hole, and that's the nest in there. Of course, the babies of all rodents are born without fur, and their eyes are closed. And then it takes about a week for them to start getting the fur. And then after about 2 weeks, they're crawling away from the nest. And the nest will be empty then, and then mom can get ready to do it all over again, okay? Because those baby voles have now left the nest and will go out to find their own food, okay? A vole in my garden will eat just as much as a groundhog in my garden. And I used to think in my garden that, okay, if it's something that was eaten down on the ground really low, it must have been a vole. If it was nibbled up high, well, then I blame the deer. Around this height, I blame the groundhog. But then one day I saw the vole climb its way up to the top of the tomato plant. I also spotted it climb the top of the sunflower to get to the seeds at the flower's head. Yeah, I was not happy then either, okay? But, I sit back and I think, yep, they have to eat too. So here's one having a snack on the black raspberries. And here's the mole, M-O-L-E. They are a digging machine. Their underground holes that they make aren't just on the top of the grass. They go under, okay? Those are their hands, their claws. They are little digging monsters, and then they pop their heads up. And moles can't see very well. Well, so you might as well just stay under the ground, which is typically what they do. You don't typically see moles up in the sunlight. They're going to stay deep down under the ground, and that's where all their food is. Because since the moles are eating meat, they're eating the worms, they're eating the bugs that live under the soil. And their skull shows us that they are meat eaters. Look at all those teeth. Sharp teeth. Also, I have one of their skulls up here. Notice, no continuously growing rodent teeth. So the mole is not a rodent. Here are the bumps. And we say when you see the speed bumps, you know the moles are there. Okay? So not only are the moles making the speed bumps, which is where they're feeding, they then have lots of bumps and mounds where they come out of the ground. Let me go to that one, like that. You know, that's where they all, or a couple of them, pop their heads out of the ground. I'm going to go back to this one. But they will go even deeper and have underground activity deeper than right on the surface. More food, the deeper you go. They can get down there because of their digging. Now, the snakes will share some of the underground homes with the moles. But for the snake, it can eat the mole then. And you let the mole dig out the hole, and then you go and you have lunch under that hole. That's probably the best way to control a mole population. If your yard looks like that, put a few snakes out there, and that'll take care of those moles. There he is. They're cute. Their fur is super thick and soft also. Unlike the mouse, who has more like groundhog fur, the mole has more like muskrat fur, super thick. And this one's not a mole. It's not a vole either. This one is our only venomous mammal, a shrew. It looks like a mouse. It looks like a vole. It is a shrew. We have the least shrew. We have the short-tailed shrew. I think there's a water shrew. And the shrew is a meat eater. There's its skull. Because did I not bring the shrew skull, or did someone not get the shrew skull out of its container? Oh, okay. I will look and see if the shrew skull's in there. But this is what it looks like. Just a smaller version of the mole, but red teeth. The red teeth tell us that it is venomous. Okay? So let's see, here we have, who will win? The shrew wins. Because all that venomous shrew needs to do, and there it is bite the snake. Okay? And the shrew can do that before the snake gives it a big hug. Whereas in the mole world, the vole world, the mouse world, the snake always wins. In the shrew world, the shrew usually wins. The shrew also often wins when a hawk picks it up, because it bites the hawk. And the shrew bite hurts a lot more than the rodent bite. And oftentimes it gets dropped. That's pretty much how I have found every shrew and mole, because the mole bite hurts more, is I have found them laying in a field, and you can see hawk talon marks on its back. That the hawk picked up that shrew, or it picked up that mole, and it got bit, and it dropped it. Okay? The hawk needs to learn, eat the mice instead. So there's our shrew. They'll go under the ground But they don't have to be under the ground. They're not making these tunnels and stuff. They're often going to be hiding in little brush piles, but not digging, like the mole is the digger of all of them. Oh, and then we have my favorite, the gray ground squirrel. Yes, they are rodents. I may have even heard people call them tree rats before. Okay? That squirrel is definitely a rodent. Same teeth structure. Great for chewing. Think about that black walnut that it chews through. That black walnut is one of the hardest natural growing substances, and that squirrel with the power in its jaws, back here where they're connected, and the power of these front teeth, it can chew that black walnut into a ton of little pieces. This looks like one I saw in my yard yesterday. One of the 7. Oh, yeah, is right. But they're always gathering leaves because they're always adding to their nest. And squirrels can be giving birth right now, year round. There are often babies up in their nest. Yeah, this one is cute because it's someone else's yard, in my opinion. So in addition to building the nest, the squirrel will also use a cavity, a hollow hole in the tree to raise their young. Heck, they'll take over, unfortunately, a birdhouse. I have seen squirrels who have taken the small entrance hole of a birdhouse and chewed it to make it big so they could live in there. You know, you got to give the squirrel a little credit. You stay a little drier in a birdhouse than you do in a nest of leaves. But if you think about every tree, and when you peek outside today, because now's the best time to see, the winter's the best time to see the cluster of leaves up in the trees. Yeah, every one of those clusters was at one point a squirrel home. Okay? It's not a crow's nest. It's not a blue jay nest. They use sticks and leaves. Squirrels don't typically use sticks. They use a cluster of leaves. Okay, they're going to use the branches as the sticks to support those leaves. Okay? So any time of the year, they could have young up in that tree. And the squirrels are probably one of the best parents when it comes to wild animals because they carefully will move those babies if they feel threatened. You know, if all of a sudden another animal comes into the territory or gets close enough to the nest, let's say it's even a crow, okay? They're going to move their babies to one of those other piles and clusters of leaves up in the trees. So I say that they're gentle with their young, but then they also are the ones who, if they feel really threatened, or if Lisa doesn't fill her feeder enough and they don't find enough bird food or walnuts or acorns, they do eat their young. Yeah, then that's one of those, that's nature, you know. I've had some parents tell me, now that sounds like a good idea. No, but the squirrels, that is, when the food is scarce, they do. But hey, 2 months later, they're going to have 6 more. So it's okay. I notice in my yard when the babies leave the nest, because you see smaller squirrels, smaller tails. Wait, this is the New York squirrel. They don't use leaves. Actually, I read an article about this. The squirrels are now using plastic bags to build their nests. Not a joke, unfortunately, and that's where this picture came from. Hey, if they help clean up the environment a little bit, yeah, let them do it, okay? Other animals will use plastic in their nest, like ospreys. In an osprey, that's the bird similar to the eagle, they'll put plastic, they have found plastic toys and dolls and stuff in osprey nests. Scientists say that they're hoarders in that aspect and they like the bright colors. I think with the squirrel, that's pretty much all they can find. You know, I might like the squirrels in my neighborhood a little bit more if they start cleaning up the trash that blows down the road on trash day. They'll all have a nest anywhere. This was somebody's car where the squirrel stored the walnuts and the nesting material. Yeah, would not like to have a squirrel in there. Although my mother one day popped the hood of her truck years ago, and looking at her was a groundhog. My grandmother also had mice who lived in her car, chewed the, you know, you don't move your car for a week and it's fair game to all the wild animals. And the mice chewed the wires. And then she got in the car and turned on the heater, the air conditioning. Well, that was a mess. So rodents can do damage not only to your cars. We used to also have a squirrel who loved to chew the hose of the gas grill regularly. We called it the huffing squirrel. You know, getting that gas out of there. They can be destructive. Of course, scat. You know, you want to know that they're there in case you don't see them, although squirrels we do typically see. Except this one. The one who comes out at night. The flying squirrel. The flying squirrel, of course, has this extra skin to glide from treetop to treetop. It's about half the size of the gray ground squirrel. So I have the gray ground squirrel on this side and the flying squirrel on the other side here. And the flying squirrel, there they are, gliding. If you live down south, the species of flying squirrel you have is a sugar glider. And they pretty much look the same size, same extra skin. The sugar glider just has neater markings on it. The stripe down its back and the diamond more on its forehead there. But they are related to each other, sugar gliders and flying squirrels. Flying squirrels are the efficient nut eaters. They only put one hole or two holes in the nut and go right after the meat. Whereas the gray ground squirrel will chew the nut into 100 little pieces. You know, you find tons of pieces, you know it's gray ground squirrels that we're eating. We have a couple of these nuts where you can look at their teeth marks there. And in the state of Pennsylvania, we actually have more flying squirrels than gray ground squirrels. We just don't get to see them because they're nocturnal. They're the ones coming to your bird feeders at nighttime, visiting there. Because this is the one coming in the daytime. You know, that nice squirrel-proof feeder that the squirrel's able to take the top off and eat. Now, we don't only have gray ground squirrels, but we have to go to northern Pennsylvania to see the beautiful red squirrel. Okay? Just a color phase. But the red squirrel's always having a good hair day. It has longer fur on its ears, designed to keep it more camouflaged, okay? Because otherwise it might stand out unless it's the fall of the year. I find that red squirrels have bushier tails. If we also go north and east, there's black squirrels, okay? Just another color phase of that gray squirrel. You know, I look at all the ones in my yard, and I have a few, the gray ones, who have more brown on their body, who have a browner colored tail. I have one who has, you know, white behind its ears. So I kind of, you know, that one's whitey. And then you have the little brownie over here. And then, of course, you have chubby. Well, that's all of them. But they do have different markings, okay? And then there's this one. Yeah, I don't know, must have been in a community of gray ones, red ones, and black ones. I just thought it was a fun picture. And occasionally you'll get white ones, okay? Now this one is white, but has a little bit of pigment to it, okay? So it's not quite an albino. It has pink eyes and really bright. It's an albino. I know years ago there was a white one that lived over, I was told, over by Lancaster Country Day School, okay? Because the neighbors over there would see it all the time. But it unfortunately didn't last long because the hawks saw it all the time also, okay? So it is quite rare to see an albino of any type of wild animal, but it is one of those things that scientists want to know if we find them. They keep track of that kind of stuff. So if you ever see a white of anything running or flying around, tell me the next time I come, and I'll make sure the right people find out about that. And now our smallest ones, the mice. From the house mouse, the deer mouse, and the white-footed mouse. Well, this one's clearly a house mouse, eating snacks off of somebody's table there, or, oh, right there. How it's not getting caught by that trap. Oh, because mice are sneaky, okay? The house mouse is often more gray, sometimes browns and blacks. The thing that's different is the wild mice, like the deer mouse and the white-footed mouse, is that they have more white under their belly. Oops, before we get to that, we have mouse droppings, which is the key sign that there's a mouse in your house, okay? So I kind of joked earlier and told you all there might be snacks in my car. Well, last winter, some mouse got into my car. Because when I went to reach for that bag of pretzels off the front seat, and the plastic bag was ripped. And then I looked, and it looked like a lot of the pretzels were in pieces. Oh no, is what I thought. It was cold. That mouse could be getting in anywhere. I was grateful that it wasn't eating the wires in the front part of the car, that it was just eating the snacks in my part of the car. I never saw any mouse droppings, though, in my car. Luckily, that means they came in, they took a snack, and they left. But typically, if you have mice in the house, you'll find their droppings first. I struggle because I feed the birds, and of course I feed and make my own suet, and I use thistle, Niger seed, which looks just like this. Don't drop it on the kitchen floor. You might think there was a mouse there. Don't buy black rice and drop it on the kitchen floor, because I always say that mouse droppings look just like rice. If it's black and bigger, well, then you have a rat problem. And you'll probably know you have a rat problem because you'll probably more so hear them moving around or see the damage that they might cause when they're eating things other than just their droppings. And here's our tiny little deer mouse. They're much smaller, okay? Because they're wild, like that jumping mouse, they have bigger feet. They have that white underneath their belly. Yes, wherever you have deer mice. It's just, that's the habitat they live in, those fields and stuff like that. One of the things you want to remember with not only the house mice, the deer mouse, or even the white-footed mouse, because they'll get into our garages because they're outside, we want to make sure that their droppings don't build up because they can carry diseases in their droppings. The Haventavirus kind of thing, which is airborne, coming from the fecal matter of rodents, okay? But most specifically mice, because if you end up with mice in the house or mice in the garage or the barn, and I remember my dad telling me this when I was a little kid. We pulled into the garage in the car, and I saw a mouse crawling up the concrete of the wall. And I said, "Dad, there's a mouse." And I remember, "There's never just one mouse," he said. "There's always more." Because if you have 2 mice today, those 2 mice will have 10 babies. And 2 weeks later, the 2 mice and the 10 babies are just about ready to have 10 more babies. So you're going to end up with lots of mice, which is why it's good that we have those things that control their population. Okay? Not a mouse, bigger than a mouse, longer tail, hangs out in rocky, now you got to see what it was. I thought I had a next picture. Hangs out in rocky areas. We have the Allegheny wood rat. Okay? Not your city sewer rat. This is our native wild rat, who is actually, unfortunately, a threatened species. Okay? They like those rocky outcrops. Now, they will extend from Pennsylvania down into Virginia, West Virginia, along the Allegheny Mountain Ridge. Okay? That's where they live. And recently I read something about them that there is concern that not only they're threatened now, but that they are going to soon be endangered, and they're looking to put them on the federal list, not just a list in Pennsylvania and the states that they live in, so that we don't see them often. And like I said, they're going to hide out in the rocky areas, larger than our mice, okay? But definitely not as large as that capybara, okay? Or even the groundhog. They weigh only about 5 to 7 pounds. And then we have the porcupine, who is a rodent. The porcupine, I had to wait all this time to show you the porcupine skull, because the porcupine skull is my skull that I use to show you how their teeth continuously grow. Because I can pull the porcupine tooth out. See, now I'm a rodent dentist. You too can come up and be a rodent dentist today. But it shows that they have to do a lot of eating and gnawing, or their teeth continuously grow. If they're not constantly eating, that tooth will grow into the bottom part. Now, rabbits have the same problem, but rabbits are not rodents. Okay? They kind of look like it. A lot of people think they are. Well, because up until probably around the 1950s, they were classified as a rodent. And then scientists looked closer at the rabbit's skull. The rabbit has more teeth than rodents, so they are now in their own category. That's why they're not in my PowerPoint today, okay? The porcupine, of course, is the one you don't want to hug, because it hugs back. We can find porcupines. This skull actually came from northern Pennsylvania, okay? I've never seen or heard of a porcupine in Lancaster County yet. They are excellent at climbing trees, okay? I think they look cute. Well, did this one have a better face? You just don't want to get close to them. Now, it is folklore that they shoot their quills. They don't shoot their quills. You just have to get close to them to get those quills stuck to you. And they have the quills all over the back, okay? All over their tail. And I've heard them say, yeah, the quill, it hurts when it goes in, but it hurts even more coming out. It has that barb like a fish hook, okay? And that's why it hurts more coming out. The quill is actually just an extension of their hair shafts, okay? But makes for great defense for them and a great way to protect themselves. So, porcupines. Can you figure out who this rodent is? You know, it's the one you always see with chubby cheeks. Is it Chip or is it Dale? I don't know. Chipmunks. You know, it's one of those that we don't see too often. Okay? Their population here in Lancaster County is not as abundant as it is some other places where they have more wooded areas to be. But they are definitely the food storers when it comes to rodents. In their underground home, and typically their underground home starts as a pile of rocks or a wood pile. When I was a kid, we had a wood pile and we had chipmunks at home. And you'd always see them run through the wood pile and down under the ground. Kind of like this picture shows the rocks. This spot here is their nest. This would be sleeping quarters. This, if you can see the word, it says hoard. That's the food stash. All that food that was in the chubby cheeks that he took back to the underground den gets stored in its own little compartments. Okay? I think I'd make a good chipmunk. Chipmunks also love pine areas. And this one's on a bird feeder. I'd be happy to feed chipmunks at my bird feeder. Okay? They also like the protection of a pine forest. Okay? And their population can go in spikes. Like there have been a couple of years that we've had maybe 5 chipmunks running around the environmental center. And then a year later, there might only be 1 or 2. And then eventually their population will go back up again. But it's rare. Their stripes are helping them be more camouflaged. So they are actually a little safer from predators than some of the other rodents we talked about today, because they can be more camouflaged and dip and dive in different directions. So I hope throughout the day you've maybe gotten a little bit more appreciation for some of those rodents. And it's okay if not everybody likes the squirrel. I'm fine with that. But all of our rodents are, of course, important to the environment. They're a great food source for other animals. And of course, even those beavers and muskrats really help to create some of those habitats. So all of the rodents do have a special place within our habitat, and they're important here. So enjoy when you see those rodents, and feel free to come up and touch and feel the different parts of them. I did not pick up, and this is the entire skeleton of a rat. Where you can see even in its tail, it has those amazing bones. The whole backbone and all the way down through its tail. How many? They're about 10. So you have to remember all the muscle and stuff that would have been covering them. They weigh about 10 pounds. Yep. How long? They're about 10 inches long. So if I pulled out that tail, it would come out more